Welcome to Charting the Course, Navigating the Future of American Naval Power. Today, we're thrilled to have Dr. Sam Tangredi, the esteemed Latest Chair of Future Warfare Studies and the Director of the Institute for Future Warfare Studies at U.S. Naval War College. Dr. Tangredi, a former U.S. Navy captain and strategist, brings a wealth of experiences and insight. He holds a Ph.D. in International Relations from the University of Southern California and is an award-winning author, having penned significant works such as AI at War, How Big Data, Artificial Intelligence, and Machine Learning Are Changing Naval Warfare, and Anti-Access Warfare, Countering A2AD Strategies. His contributions to naval literature have earned him the U.S. Naval Institute's Arleigh Burke Prize and the U.S. Navy Lead Alfred Thayer Mayon Award. In this session, Dr. Tangredi will illuminate the profound impact, the implications of the emerging technologies of the future of naval warfare and sea power. He will delve into the roles of artificial intelligence, big data, and machine learning, guiding us through the complex landscape of modern naval strategies and challenges. The first question I have is, how did you select and collaborate with the contributors of the book, AI at War and Big Data, Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Are Changing Naval Warfare? And what were the main challenges and benefits of working with such a diverse, multidisciplinary group of experts?
Let me begin by explaining a little bit about myself and my approach to AI. I'm not a technologist. I'm a strategist who looks at technology and asks the question that technologists don't necessarily ask. That is, how does this new technology deter or defeat the People's Liberation Army? And basically, I have a checklist of starting what are the assumptions of the people promoting this technology? What is the real cost, including opportunity cost? What is the timeline? More importantly, what are the vulnerabilities it has and vulnerabilities it might bring? What will we have to give up to be able to use this technology? How does it integrate with our current strategy? And those are the sort of questions that we try to ask. The book was a cooperative project between an institute I was running at the Naval War College, which was Institute for Future Warfare Studies, and Navy Information Warfare Center Pacific there in San Diego. My co-editor was George Galderisi. I think he's director for technical futures there at Navy Information Warfare Center Pacific. And we put together a team where we had academics from the War College, a number of scientists and engineers from the center, and then plus a number of outside experts and outside policymakers. No flag officers, no political appointees, just the people who work on this. And they were selected because they were those who were willing to give an honest assessment and not just present how great my program is. So that's how it worked. I am not a specialist in AI, although I've studied it, just like I've studied other technologies. I'm certainly not afraid of it. But again, the whole point of the book and the whole point of my study into the technologies is to ask the questions about what vulnerabilities this is bringing, the full story. If you say, for example, that we're creating this AI system that the Navy or Department of Defense should adopt, the first question I ask is, okay, where was it built? Did you hire AI scientists in China? Is the programming open source? Who did your labeling, your training of the system? Because all those particular parts bring vulnerabilities. I don't think that we have concentrated on that. And in fact, the focus I've had is on deception and AI. Can AI handle deception? AI is all about crunching big data. War is all about deception. If your big data is deceived, what does the system provide? So those are the sort of things in the book. And the people writing chapters range from, former Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work, who's the big proponent of AI in the Department of Defense, all the way, as I said, to scientists and engineers working on what can AI do for integrated fires or command and control, that sort of thing. And then if you were to look at the book, I say it's broken into three parts. The first part are the promises of the technology. Second is the practicalities. The third are the problems. So we have Bob and others talking about what it could do. The scientists and engineers talk about what they can do. And myself and others who focus on strategy towards the end saying, okay, what might go wrong with this and what are the issues involved? So that's how the book is structured.
Let me go back a step for those of us who are less initiated in this whole thing. How would you define AI and its associated components? And I appreciate that it's a quantum level out from what the existing technology is, but can you define it just a bit more carefully?
For those people who are interested in this topic, that is military applications of AI, I and a co-author have a book coming out in February, Naval Institute Press, that is kind of the layman's guide to military applications of AI. It's not written in a scholarly way. It's written for a person who's interested in it, may not have a background in it, may not necessarily even have a background in military affairs. That'll come out in February, March. Naval Institute Press. It's called, exciting name, Algorithms of Armageddon. But before I do any conference or anything on AI, that's exactly why I ask every presenter to start. What is your definition of AI? And there's really three definitions. There's sort of contrasting definitions. The first one is a system that can duplicate human behavior. And that is particularly in the areas of visual recognition and natural language processing and translation between languages. And this is how, when in the 1950s, when McCarthy and the other AI scientists first started, that's what they were trying to do, develop a system that could do the same thought processes, the same functions as a human could do. Now, that gives everybody an impression of both kind of the positive and the negative nature. That makes people afraid when they think about this is going to do what humans could do, start being fearful of the Terminator or killer robots or something like that. But the second definition, which I think is even more valid, and it comes from a former vice president of Oracle, is AI is statistical methods to train a computer to make predictions on past behavior or past information. Now, when you think of it that way, then it kind of becomes less frightening because you see what this is a system using computers that instead of merely a human just running a program to be able to take this data and make some sort of conclusion from it. Now, it's statistical methods. That is, the system does not know that something is correct or not correct. It knows that something might be 90% correct or 70% correct. So that's the second definition. And finally, the third definition, which came from a Navy lieutenant commander who was working with me and did one of the chapters of the book. He says, really, it's anything that we haven't done with computers before, because you have a whole bunch of people calling things artificial intelligence or AI that really doesn't fall within that category. And that was published in Financial Times, which is the Wall Street Journal of the UK. They found that 40% of the new startups in Europe that claimed to be working on artificial intelligence really weren't. They were software companies, basically. Yeah. But if you say you're working on AI, they got more venture capital. That feeds into the third definition. Sure. Depending on the definition is how you see this. Now, if you see it simply as replicating human decision-making, then the Navy has AI for 40 years. Something like the close-in weapon system, which detects, tracks, evaluates, and then if you put it in the autonomous mode, makes the decision to fire and shoots at the thing. I mean, that's replicating what a sailor would be doing. So if you use the first definition, it's much broader. Now, we don't think of those things as AI because they're old. You know, we think of a new cutting edge. But if you use that definition, there are a lot of systems that actually do that. Now, you could modify that. We're talking about computers that have learning processes, and that's obviously close-in weapon system does not, because if it learned from trial and error, the ship would be sunk. Those are the three basic definitions, and depending on which one you use primary, it frames your perspective on this technology and your expectations and your fears.
How does the Pentagon evaluate all this, and what are they doing vis-a-vis China and our potential enemies?
I would put it this way, in the Pentagon, certainly up to now, some of the decision makers have approached AI in the same way that Admiral Ernie King approached logistics at the start of World War II. King made this famous statement about, I don't know what this logistics stuff that General Marshall keeps talking about, but I want some of it. And that's been kind of the approach to Department of Defense leadership to AI. We don't really quite know what we're going to do with it, but everybody tells us it's great. It's the cutting edge technology, so we want some of it.
Yeah.
So they created a joint artificial intelligence center or office to promote artificial intelligence with DoD. That center has now been disbanded because, basically they went out to preach that AI would be a good thing to adopt. But the reality, as far as adopting military applications, is you have to figure out what you're trying to achieve and then tailor the AI for that. Not say, okay, we're going to take AI and apply it to something. And that would be the proper approach. If you're talking about something like we want to improve our sonar system detection and say, well, humans can do it, but it requires a lot of skills. Perhaps the machine could do it. Then that's a different approach than say we're going to take this AI as a condiment and sprinkle it around. It's a problem, and you're finding a system that may be able to solve the problem. That's how I think we should adopt AI. Now, our problem, quite frankly, is China is posed to be the AI leader because they need it for a different reason. The Chinese Communist Party is going to use AI to control the population. They're already doing that in Western China with the Uyghurs, minority group. They're traditionally Muslim in Western China. They have a surveillance system driven by AI algorithms that have categorized people. They know, they have a record of not only what you did, but what all your family members did, what they may have texted, everything like that. So the Chinese Communist Party is pouring money into that. And since no company in China can produce artificial intelligence or an algorithm without giving it to the People's Liberation Army, you have a situation much different than us. Hopefully the U.S. government will never try to use it to control people. But even more important, we can't compel Google to say, okay, give all your intellectual property to the Department of Defense so that they can figure out how to use it. In China, that's done. I mean, there's no way anyone could do without it, which is why I always kind of laugh when I hear, Chinese technologists or investors talking about how separate they might be from every major company. AI company in China has a Communist Party representative. This is a system. So that's why they have great potential of being the AI superpower, because they want it for that and they'll use it for military applications too. Russia is different because it's not a party system that has to constantly retain itself. It's an oligarch with a group around him, and they really don't have successors. So they're not really worried about the population control pit. What they are worried about is the military part, because they have a shrinking military cohort. They're not too reliable. Most don't want to fight in Ukraine. So how do you have conventional military power? You build autonomous systems, and you need AI to build autonomous systems. In fact, they've tested autonomous tanks in Syria. Tests up to now haven't gone really well, but they are looking to that. The scary part is they are building autonomous systems to guard their strategic nuclear launch sites as guards. Now, that should frighten people, but they're willing to do that because Putin will trust the machines more than the people. Yeah. So that's Russia's focus, different incentive of where to spend the money, how to spend the money in AI. In the US, AI is commercially driven. The US government is trying to take that commercial applications and figure out how you can apply it to military functions. And our potential opponents, our competitors, our potential opponents, much different. Military and the commercial is intertwined. So they have a great advantage in developing AI. And even if we have the better scientists, even if we have the better universities and stuff, they're going to pour all their resources into it. And what I talk about in this new book is about Silicon Valley and a number of companies. Eric Schmidt has warned about this, that, if you do business with China, you are propping up a dictatorship. And Google and IBM and us have to really think about what they're doing there, because globalization is gone. I mean, we're going to be globalized, but all the promises of how the world would be a wonderful place obviously didn't pan out. So that's what I see as far as the US, China, Russia, and AI. What the Department of Defense is doing is trying to figure out, how do you apply this? And I think we're moving away from the condiment approach to, okay, what are the problems we have to apply to? And that's coming from the deck plates level. That's coming from, I work with submarine officers who want to use AI for improving sonar analysis. And so it's coming at that level, not from top down. The effective use of AI is coming out of that, out of Office of Navy Research, doing particular projects, rather than the Secretary of Defense saying, thou shalt use AI. So that's what's happening right now in DoD.
Well, you mentioned the three areas of AI when we first began this discussion. And it seems like China fits into one, Russia fits into the other one, and US is into the third.
Those are the incentives. We're all three are going to use it for commercial purposes and many other things. But when I'm talking about the incentives, you have three different incentives. In the US, it's to make money. Businesses want to make money. And China is to control the population. Party wants to control the population. In Russia, it's to make up for manpower and improve their military power while they have a shrinking population of military age cohort people. And so those are the three overriding incentives that kind of shape attitudes and the government's approach to it. There's a lot of promises in AI as far as helping to solve problems where there is an inordinate amount of data. There's big data that humans cannot crunch and come up with conclusions. And here you have a machine that's able to do that because, it could go through ones and zeros at infinitesimal speed and capable of doing that. But there's a lot of vulnerabilities that brings in with it. So that's what we have to recognize.
Great discussion. Very fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
One of the things you wanted to discuss was the legal and ethical issues involved here.
Well, just recently, the Biden administration has issued an executive order on the use of AI in the U.S. government and then encouraging industry. And they're focusing on ethical uses, that is, to try to protect personal privacy. And then they're very concerned about bias in the systems, particularly in the visual recognition systems and that. And that's all very worthy, because the idea is to protect U.S. citizens from your life being the big data that's being analyzed by commercial systems in order to sell you something. However, in the military frame, what is happening is, since our potential opponents are investing and want to apply AI in a big way, autonomous systems, that's pretty much driving us in the same direction. Up till now, the Department of Defense's legal, ethical approach has been, we will not allow autonomous systems to take lethal actions, that there will always be a human in the loop, as we would call, making the decision of whether or not to shoot or not shoot, whether or not to kill or not kill. I think that is very noble, but I think the situation is going to come to a point where in any major conflict, use of autonomous systems is going to be it's going to be basically like unrestricted submarine warfare was. There were laws against submarines sinking civilian ships, but they did anyway because that was what was the most effective way to try to end the war, to try to win the war. I think that the focus on legal and ethics works when your opponents are also focused on legal and ethics. And when they're not, you're often pushed to a point where, okay, we'll apply these laws and ethics to the U.S. citizens within the U.S., but if we have to use them against potential opponent, we have to think of them differently. So that's my point.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the onus is also on the enforcer of this, namely the government, to be absolutely ethically clean themselves. It's a complicated system that we're dealing with.
Yes.
A lot of complex issues. Last question, Dr. Tangredi. What role can the Americans for a stronger Navy help and communicate and engage more effectively for the U.S. Navy and contribution to the nation and the world?
Well, I have some very decided thoughts on this, most that don't necessarily apply to AI itself. We need to change the trends on how Department of Defense is spending its money. We have a Department of Defense that's perpetuating a military that can fight in Afghanistan, not one that can handle a major threat. Why? Because jointness, which I was one of the first Navy joint officers, come to the point where each service gets its share. Each service is supposed to be in a mission. So the Navy and the Air Force have had shortfalls in maintaining their systems because we poured the money into the Army and into Afghanistan and Iraq. We have to change the mix. There's a great quote by General Miley, the former Joint Chiefs of Staff, where he says, I'm an Army guy, but in reality, the defense of the United States falls on the Navy and the Air Force, and also Space Force and cyber forces in support of them. But Department of Defense is not doing that. And the Navy leadership does not seem willing to come up and say, look, in the Pacific, if there's a war in the Pacific against the People's Republic of China over Taiwan, the Army is not going to be winning that war. And if we haven't built enough ships, if we don't have enough ordnance, if the Air Force does not have long-range aircraft that can bring long-range anti-ship missiles into the theater, we're going to lose that war. In fact, I'm very pessimistic. I'm very disappointed in what Department of Defense is doing. And what has to happen is the American people have to come forth and say this, we no longer want a Defense Department designed to fight in Afghanistan. We want a department that is structured to be able to protect us. And what protects us is Navy, Air Force, and support of that Space Forces and cyber forces, because our potential opponents are over there, over the sea. We don't want them to come here. And if we want to affect them, we have to be able to control the sea to get there. And I don't see Department of Defense taking that seriously, really.
Why is the Navy not asserting itself on an obvious threat?
Because everybody's bought into the ideology of jointness. Every service should have a share in everything. From about 2008, 2013, the Air Force and the Navy worked on something called Air-Sea Battle. CNO and Chief of Staff of the Air Force. It was all about how we would fight the war over the sea there in the South China Sea and East China Sea. And it was shut down by the Joint Staff because the Army complained they didn't have their share. They weren't participating. And this ideology, Navy leadership doesn't want to rock the boat on that. It's time that there's a revolt of the admirals. It isn't so much the employment of forces. That has to be joint in employment forces. My concern is the budget and what forces we're building. We're looking at joint campaigns as if they're land wars. It's not going to be a land war against the People's Republic of China if we were ever to go to fight that war. Different strategies applied. One size does not fit all. Right now, Department of Defense thinks one size fits all.
Thank you, Dr. Tangredi, for all that you do for not only the U.S. Navy, but our country. We certainly appreciate and respect your service, sir, and look forward to many more conversations in the future about these very important topics. And with that, we thank you for your time today as well.
It's my pleasure. And tell your audience, they have to do not barely writing their congressmen, but writing for their local newspapers and stuff about these issues myself. If I have an audience in the Pentagon, someone who will seriously take my research seriously, I focus on that. If I have no audience because they're listening to somebody else or it's inconvenient truths, then I publish in Proceedings or in other journals and hopefully get the ideas out. Maybe the current leadership won't listen to the ideas, but the lieutenants, the lieutenant commanders, the commanders who someday will be the flag officers, if I can get these ideas to them, if they can think about it, then perhaps they will be able to create a different future for the Navy.
I appreciate that. Well said. And I think, the fundamental truth is there's peace and strength. If we're stronger, we carry a bigger stick, we can create a more peaceful world. And so ultimately that is also the aim.